Have you ever wondered what happens when someone's job requires them to follow rules so strange, so specific, that they sound like they're straight out of a horror movie? Well, today I'm going to tell you about Marcus, a night shift security guard at a remote research facility in Montana, who was given a list of rules that would make your skin crawl. And trust me, by the end of this story, you'll understand why some jobs come with instructions that seem to defy all logic. Marcus had been looking for work for months when he stumbled across a job posting that seemed too good to be true. Night security at a research facility, 12-hour shifts, excellent pay, and minimal qualifications required. The only catch? The facility was located 3 hours outside of Billings, Montana, in an area so remote that GPS couldn't even find it properly. But desperate times called for desperate measures, and Marcus needed the money. The interview process was conducted entirely over the phone, which Marcus found odd but not alarming. The hiring manager, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, had a professional but distant tone. She asked standard questions about his availability, his uncomfort with isolation, and his ability to follow instructions precisely. When she emphasized the word precisely, something in her voice made Marcus pay closer attention. This position requires absolute adherence to our security protocols, Dr. Chen explained. These aren't suggestions or guidelines. They are rules that must be followed without exception. Can you handle that level of responsibility? Marcus assured her he could, and within a week he received a call confirming he'd gotten the job. Along with his start date came detailed driving instructions to the facility, since standard navigation systems wouldn't work in the area. The instructions were oddly specific, mentioning landmarks like the third dead tree after the abandoned gas station and the rock formation that looks like a sleeping bear. On his first night, Marcus made the long drive through increasingly desolate terrain. The facility, when he finally found it, was nothing like what he'd expected. Instead of a sleek modern building, he encountered a series of concrete structures that looked more like bunkers than research labs. The main building was surrounded by a 12-foot chain-link fence topped with razor wire, and the entire complex was illuminated by harsh floodlights that cast strange shadows across the barren landscape. At the main gate, Marcus was met by Derek, the day shift supervisor who would be training him for the next 3 nights. Derek was a thin, nervous man in his 50s who kept checking his watch and glancing at the setting sun with obvious anxiety. "You're cutting it close," Derek said as he led Marcus through the security checkpoint. Rule number 1, transition between shifts must be completed before full darkness. No exceptions. As they walked through the facility, Derek handed Marcus a laminated sheet of paper. "These are your rules," he said. "Read them, memorize them, and follow them exactly. Don't try to be creative. Don't try to improve the system. And don't ever think you know better than the people who wrote these rules." Marcus looked down at the list, expecting standard security protocols about checking doors and monitoring cameras. What he found instead made him wonder if someone was playing an elaborate prank on him. Rule 1. Never look directly at the cameras in Lab Section C between the hours of 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Monitor the feeds using only your peripheral vision. Rule 2. If you hear piano music coming from the cafeteria, do not investigate. Lock yourself in the security office and wait for it to stop. Rule 3. The elevator to sub-level 3 is off-limits to all security personnel. If it arrives at your floor without being called, do not get on. If someone or something exits the elevator, immediately report to Dr. Chen via the red phone. Rule 4. Hourly patrols must be completed in exactly 47 minutes. Not 45, not 50. Set your timer and stick to the schedule. Rule 5. If you encounter Dr. Williams during your shift, verify his identity by asking him to recite the periodic table backwards from element 92. Dr. Williams died 3 years ago. Marcus stopped reading and looked at Derek. This has got to be some kind of hazing ritual for new guys, right? Derek's expression was deadly serious. I wish it was, Marcus. I really do. But these rules exist for good reasons, and ignoring them can have consequences that go far beyond losing your job. The training continued with Derek showing Marcus the security office, a cramped room filled with monitors displaying feeds from cameras throughout the facility. Most of the screens showed empty hallways and dark laboratories, but Marcus noticed that several cameras in what Derek referred to as Section C displayed only static. Equipment malfunction? Marcus asked. That's what the reports say, Derek replied, but his tone suggested otherwise. The important thing is that you never try to fix them yourself, and you never go into Section C during your shift. That area is handled by specialized day shift personnel only. Over the next 2 hours, Derek walked Marcus through the patrol routes, showed him how to operate the various security systems, and introduced him to the other night staff. There was Maria, a janitor who worked the graveyard shift cleaning the administrative areas, and Dr. Peterson, a researcher who apparently never left his lab in Section B. Dr. Peterson is harmless, Derek explained, but he can be eccentric. Sometimes he'll try to engage you in conversation about his work. Be polite, but don't encourage him. And whatever you do, don't let him convince you to look at his experiments. As they completed the tour, Derek's anxiety seemed to increase with each passing minute. He kept checking his watch and glancing toward the exits. Why are you so nervous about leaving? Marcus asked. Derek stopped walking and turned to face him. Because once I leave, you're going to be alone here with whatever lives in this place after dark. And despite what the official reports say, this isn't just a research facility. It's a containment facility. Before Marcus could ask what that meant, Derek's radio crackled to life. Day shift personnel must exit the facility immediately, came Dr. Chen's voice. Night protocols are now in effect. Derek handed Marcus the keys to the security office and headed for the exit at a pace just short of running. Remember the rules, he called over his shoulder. And whatever happens tonight, don't try to be a hero. Alone now, Marcus made his way back to the security office and settled in for what he hoped would be an uneventful first night. He reviewed the list of rules again, still struggling to believe they were serious. But as the hours passed and the facility settled into its nighttime routine, he began to understand that everything about this place was far from normal. His first patrol at 10 p.m. went smoothly enough. The hallways were empty, the laboratories were secured, and nothing seemed out of place. But as he walked past Section C, he noticed something odd. Despite the fact that the cameras showed only static, he could hear faint sounds coming from behind the secured doors. It sounded almost like conversation. Marcus paused, remembering Derek's warning about not investigating sounds from restricted areas. He made a note in his log and continued his patrol, but the feeling that something was watching him persisted throughout the rest of his rounds. By midnight, Marcus had settled into a routine of monitoring the cameras and reading a book he'd brought to help pass the time. But as 2 a.m. approached, he found himself staring at the Section C monitors with growing curiosity. The static seemed to shift and swirl in patterns that almost looked intentional, and occasionally he thought he could make out shapes moving within the electronic snow. Then he remembered rule number 1. Never look directly at the Section C cameras between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Marcus forced himself to look away, using his peripheral vision to monitor the feeds as instructed. What he saw in those brief, indirect glimpses made his blood run cold. The static wasn't random electronic interference. It was moving, shifting, forming patterns that looked disturbingly like faces pressed against the camera lenses from the inside. At 2:30 a.m., the piano music started. The sound drifted through the facility's ventilation system, a melancholy melody that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Marcus recognized the tune. It was Chopin's Funeral March, played with a skill that suggested professional training. But according to his rules, the cafeteria should have been empty, and the building's piano was supposedly broken and hadn't been played in years. Following the instructions, Marcus locked himself in the security office and tried to focus on anything other than the haunting music that filled the air. But as the melody continued, he began to hear something else underneath it. Voices, singing along in harmony. The voices sounded like children, dozens of them, their pure tones creating a ghostly choir that made the hair on the back of Marcus's neck stand on end. The music continued for exactly 17 minutes, then stopped as abruptly as it had begun. Marcus waited another 5 minutes before unlocking the security office door, his hands shaking slightly as he turned the key. At 3:15 a.m. during his next patrol, Marcus encountered his first major test of the rules. As he walked past the main elevator bank, he heard the familiar ding of an elevator arriving at his floor. This wouldn't have been unusual, except that he hadn't called for an elevator, and according to his logs, he was the only person supposed to be moving around the facility at this hour. The elevator doors opened with a soft whoosh, revealing an interior that looked normal at first glance. But as Marcus stood there, frozen by indecision, he noticed that the elevator's floor was covered with what looked like fresh dirt, and there was a smell coming from inside that reminded him of a cemetery after rain. As he watched, something moved in the shadows at the back of the elevator. It was tall, humanoid in shape, but wrong in ways that Marcus's mind struggled to process. Its movements were too fluid, too quick, and when it turned toward him, he caught a glimpse of eyes that reflected the hallway lights like those of an animal. Marcus backed away from the elevator, his heart pounding as he reached for his radio to contact Dr. Chen. But before he could make the call, the thing in the elevator seemed to notice him. It stepped forward, and Marcus got his first clear look at it. It was wearing a lab coat and had the general shape of a human being, but its features were all wrong. Its limbs were too long, its fingers ended in points that might have been claws or might have been surgical instruments, and its face was a smooth expanse of pale skin with no visible features except for those reflective eyes. The elevator doors began to close, but just before they shut completely, the thing raised one of its elongated hands in what might have been a wave or a threat. Marcus waited until he was sure the elevator had moved on before reaching for the red phone in his security office. Dr. Chen answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting for his call. "Security office reporting," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I had an encounter at the main elevator bank. Something came up from sub-level 3. Describe it." Dr. Chen's voice was clinical, professional. Marcus did his best to explain what he'd seen, though he struggled to find words for something that defied easy description. Dr. Chen listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification about specific details. "Thank you for the report," she said when he finished. "Continue your rounds as normal. The situation will be handled." "Handled how?" Marcus asked. But the line had already gone dead. The rest of the night passed without major incident, though Marcus noticed several small anomalies that he dutifully recorded in his log. Doors that he was certain he'd checked and found locked were standing slightly ajar during his next patrol. The temperature in certain sections of the building fluctuated wildly without explanation, and throughout the facility, he occasionally heard sounds that didn't belong: footsteps in empty hallways, voices speaking in languages he didn't recognize, and the constant feeling that he was being observed by unseen watchers. When Derek arrived for the morning shift, Marcus was more than ready to leave, but as he prepared to hand over the keys and head home, Derek stopped him. "How was your first night?" Derek asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "Eventful," Marcus replied. "I had to use the red phone." Derek nodded grimly. "The elevator? Among other things. Derek, what exactly is this place? What are we guarding?" Derek looked around to make sure they weren't being overheard, then leaned in closer. "Officially, this is the Montrose Research Facility, a government-funded laboratory that studies atmospheric anomalies and geological phenomena. Unofficially, it's a containment site for things that the government doesn't want the public to know about." "What kind of things?" "The kind that require very specific rules to keep contained," Derek said. "The kind that test the limits of what science can explain. The researchers here aren't just studying natural phenomena, Marcus. They're studying things that exist in the spaces between what we consider natural and supernatural." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "And we're supposed to just babysit these things? We're supposed to follow the rules that keep them from becoming everyone else's problem," Derek corrected. "The people who wrote those rules learned through trial and error what works and what doesn't. Some of that learning came at a very high cost." Before Marcus could ask what he meant by high cost, Dr. Chen's voice came over the intercom system. "Day shift personnel report to your stations. Night shift personnel are cleared for departure." Derek clapped Marcus on the shoulder. "Go home, get some sleep, and try not to think too hard about what you experienced last night. It gets easier, I promise." But as Marcus drove home through the Montana wilderness, he couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen and heard. The thing in the elevator, the voices singing along with the piano music, the faces and the static of the Section C cameras. None of it made sense according to anything he understood about the world. He spent his day off researching the Montrose Research Facility online, but found almost nothing. A few government contract listings, some scientific papers with heavily redacted sections, and a handful of local news stories about missing persons in the area, dating back several decades, but nothing that explained what was really happening in that remote complex of concrete buildings. When Marcus returned for his second night, he felt somewhat more prepared for the strangeness he might encounter. Derek met him at the gate as before, but this time his demeanor was different. More respectful, less condescending. "You handled last night well," Derek said as they walked toward the main building. "Dr. Chen was impressed with your report. Most new guards either ignore the rules completely or become so paralyzed by fear that they can't function effectively." "I'm not sure functioning effectively is how I'd describe what I did last night," Marcus replied. "You followed the protocols, you documented what you observed, and you didn't try to be a hero," Derek said. "In this job, that counts as exemplary performance." The second night began much like the first, with Marcus settling into the security office and preparing for his 10 p.m. patrol. But as he reviewed the camera feeds before beginning his rounds, he noticed something different. The Section C cameras, which had shown only static the night before, were now displaying clear images of empty laboratories. Marcus checked his watch. 9:45 p.m. According to the rules, he shouldn't look directly at those cameras between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., but there was no restriction on viewing them at other times. Curious, he focused on the Section C feeds and began to study what he could see. The laboratories looked normal enough. Sterile white walls, stainless steel equipment, and fluorescent lighting that cast everything in harsh detail. But as Marcus watched, he began to notice inconsistencies, shadows that fell in directions that didn't match the light sources, equipment that seemed to shift position between camera angles, and in one lab, a series of containment units that looked more like high-tech coffins than scientific instruments. During his 10 p.m. patrol, Marcus decided to test the boundaries of his instructions. The rules said he couldn't enter Section C during his shift. But they didn't explicitly forbid him from examining the external doors and security measures. As he approached the Section C entrance, he noticed that the keypad lock showed recent activity. Someone had accessed the area within the past few hours, but that was impossible. According to the shift schedules Derek had shown him, no one was authorized to be in Section C during night hours. The only people in the building should be Marcus, Maria the janitor, and Dr. Peterson in his Section B laboratory. Marcus made a note in his log and continued his patrol, but the mystery of Section C continued to nag at him. Who had been accessing that area, and why were the security cameras now functioning normally? His answer came at 1:30 a.m. when he was monitoring the camera feeds and preparing for his next patrol. On one of the Section C monitors, he saw a figure moving through the laboratory. At first glance, it appeared to be a person in a lab coat conducting some kind of experiment. But as Marcus watched more closely, he realized that the figure's movements were wrong. Too quick, too precise, inhuman in their efficiency. Then the figure looked directly into the camera, and Marcus found himself staring at the same featureless face he'd encountered in the elevator the night before. The thing seemed to be aware that it was being observed, and it raised one of its elongated hands in what was unmistakably a greeting. Marcus jerked his attention away from the monitor, his heart racing. According to his instructions, he wasn't supposed to look directly at the Section C cameras after 2 a.m., but it was still 30 minutes before that restriction took effect. Did that mean the rules were more flexible than he'd been told, or was he witnessing something that wasn't supposed to happen at all? Before he could decide how to respond, his radio crackled to life. It was Maria, the night janitor. "Security, this is Maria. I'm getting some weird readings on the environmental controls in Section A. The temperature sensors are showing extreme fluctuations. Security, this is Maria. I'm getting some weird readings on the environmental controls in Section A. The temperature sensors are showing extreme fluctuations, and I'm hearing some kind of mechanical noise coming from the ventilation system." Marcus grabbed his radio, grateful for the distraction from the Section C monitors. "Copy that, Maria. I'll check it out during my next patrol. Are you in any immediate danger?" "I don't think so," Maria replied, but her voice carried an undertone of uncertainty. "It's just, the sounds don't match anything I've heard in my 15 years working here. And the temperature dropped about 20 degrees in the past 5 minutes." Marcus made a note in his log and prepared to investigate during his 2 a.m. patrol. But first, he forced himself to glance back at the Section C monitors using his peripheral vision, as the rules dictated he should do after 2 a.m. approached. What he saw made his blood run cold. The laboratories were no longer empty. In each room, figures in lab coats moved with purpose, conducting experiments on equipment that Marcus was certain hadn't been there moments before. But these weren't the elongated, inhuman creatures he'd seen the night before. These figures moved like normal people, worked like normal researchers, and appeared completely human in every way, except they were all translucent, like images projected on smoke. Marcus watched in fascination as these ghostly researchers went about their work, apparently unaware that they were being observed. They manipulated instruments, recorded data, and interacted with each other in ways that seemed utterly normal, if you could ignore the fact that they were clearly not alive in any conventional sense. At exactly 2 a.m., Marcus began his patrol, starting with Section A to investigate Maria's report about the environmental controls. As he walked through the administrative corridors, he immediately noticed the temperature drop Maria had mentioned. His breath began to form visible clouds, and frost was actually forming on the metal surfaces of doors and equipment. The mechanical noise Maria had reported was coming from somewhere within the walls, a rhythmic, grinding sound that seemed to follow him as he moved through the area. Marcus checked the environmental control systems and found that they were functioning normally, at least according to their digital readouts. But the physical evidence told a different story. In the main administrative office, Marcus discovered the source of at least part of the problem. The large windows that normally looked out onto the Montana landscape now showed something else entirely. Instead of the barren hills and scattered trees he'd seen during his first patrol, the view outside showed what appeared to be a dense forest of dead trees under a starless sky. Marcus rubbed his eyes and looked again. But the impossible landscape remained. He pulled out his cell phone and took a photo through the window. But when he looked at the image on his phone's screen, it showed the normal Montana countryside. "That's not possible," he muttered, taking several more photos with the same result. The window clearly showed a dead forest, but his camera couldn't capture it. Marcus radioed Maria to let her know he'd investigated the environmental issues, but hadn't found a clear cause. He recommended she avoid Section A for the rest of her shift and focus her cleaning efforts on other areas of the facility. "Copy that," Maria replied. "To be honest, I'm happy to stay away from that part of the building tonight. Something about it just feels wrong." Marcus knew exactly what she meant, but he didn't want to worry her further by sharing his own observations about the impossible view from the windows. As he continued his patrol, Marcus found himself thinking about Derek's comments about the facility being a containment site. If that was true, then what exactly was being contained? And were the rules he'd been given designed to keep those things contained, or to keep the staff safe from them? His musings were interrupted by the sound of piano music drifting through the facility's corridors, but this time, instead of the melancholy funeral march he'd heard the night before, the music was upbeat, a ragtime piece that seemed completely out of place in the sterile research facility. Following protocol, Marcus made his way back to the security office and locked himself in. But as he sat there listening to the cheerful piano music, he began to hear other sounds mixing with the melody: laughter, conversation, and what sounded like a party in full swing. Marcus checked his watch. 2:47 a.m. According to his rules, the piano music indicated that the cafeteria was off limits, but he was curious about the other sounds he was hearing. Against his better judgment, he pulled up the cafeteria camera feed on one of his monitors. What he saw defied all logic. The cafeteria was full of people, dozens of them, dressed in clothing that looked like it belonged to the 1940s and 1950s. They were dancing, laughing, and enjoying what appeared to be some kind of celebration. At the piano, a young woman in a blue dress played with skill and enthusiasm, while couples danced on what should have been empty floor space filled with tables and chairs. But Marcus could see the tables and chairs too, occupying the same space as the dancers. It was as if two different versions of reality were superimposed on each other, both equally real and equally impossible. As he watched, one of the dancers, a man in a military uniform, looked directly into the camera and waved. Others followed his gaze, and soon the entire crowd was staring at Marcus through the security monitor, their faces friendly, but somehow wrong in ways he couldn't articulate. The piano music stopped abruptly, and the dancers began to move toward the camera. Marcus quickly switched off the monitor, his hands shaking as he reached for the red phone to contact Dr. Chen. "Security office reporting," he said when she answered. "I have a situation in the cafeteria. The camera feed is showing. I'm not sure how to describe it." "Are you following protocol?" Dr. Chen asked. "Yes, I'm locked in the security office, but..." "Then continue following protocol. Document what you observe, but do not investigate further. The situation will resolve itself." "Dr. Chen, I need to understand what's happening here. These aren't normal security issues. The things I'm seeing are exactly why those rules exist." Dr. Chen interrupted. "Marcus, You're doing well, better than most new hires. But you need to trust the system we have in place. These protocols have been developed over many years and have proven effective at maintaining the delicate balance we need to preserve. Balance between what? There was a long pause before Dr. Chen responded. Between what is and what should never be allowed to become. The line went dead, leaving Marcus alone with his questions and the fading echoes of music that shouldn't exist. The rest of the night passed more quietly, though Marcus noticed several minor anomalies during his remaining patrols: doors that opened and closed by themselves, temperature fluctuations in seemingly random locations, and the persistent feeling that he was being watched by unseen observers. But the most disturbing discovery came during his 5 a.m. patrol, when he encountered Dr. Peterson in one of the Section B laboratories. The researcher was hunched over a microscope, apparently absorbed in his work, but something about his posture seemed wrong. "Good morning, Dr. Peterson," Marcus called out as he passed the lab's open door. The figure at the microscope didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge Marcus's presence. Remembering Derek's warning about Dr. Peterson's eccentricity, Marcus decided not to press for a response and continued his patrol. But as he walked away, he realized what had bothered him about the scene. Dr. Peterson hadn't been breathing. In the several minutes Marcus had observed him, the researcher's chest hadn't moved once, and there had been no visible signs of life beyond the mechanical movements of his work. Marcus made a note in his log, but decided not to investigate further. After the night's previous events, he was beginning to understand that some things at the Montrose research facility were better left unexplored. When Derek arrived for the morning shift change, Marcus was waiting with a detailed report of the night's events. Derek listened with growing concern as Marcus described the ghostly researchers in Section C, the impossible landscape outside the Section A windows, and the party in the cafeteria. "You've had more activity in 2 nights than some guards see in months," Derek said when Marcus finished his report. "Usually it takes weeks for the facility's residents to take notice of new personnel." "Residents?" Derek glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "The facility has a long history, Marcus. It wasn't always a research station. During World War II, it was a prisoner of war camp. In the 1950s and 1960s, it was used for classified military experiments. In the 1970s, it briefly housed a psychiatric facility for patients who couldn't be treated at conventional hospitals. And now, it's all of those things and none of them," Derek said cryptically. "The boundaries between past and present aren't as solid here as they are in other places. The research they do now is designed to understand and control those boundaries, but it's not always successful." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "Are you telling me that the things I've been seeing are ghosts?" "I'm telling you that reality is more flexible than most people realize," Derek replied, "and that some places exist where that flexibility becomes visible. Your job is to observe, document, and maintain the protocols that keep that flexibility from spreading beyond these walls." As Marcus drove home after his second shift, he found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about the world. The rational part of his mind insisted that there had to be logical explanations for what he'd experienced. Experimental technology, psychological testing, elaborate pranks designed to test new employees. But the evidence of his senses told a different story. He'd seen things that couldn't exist, heard sounds that had no source, and witnessed events that defied the basic laws of physics and reality. That afternoon, Marcus decided to do some research into the history of the area where the facility was located. What he found in old newspaper archives and historical records painted a disturbing picture. The land where the Montrose Research Facility now stood had been the site of numerous unexplained events dating back to the late 1800s. Cattle mutilations, unexplained disappearances, and reports of strange lights in the sky had been documented by local newspapers for over a century. Native American tribes in the area had long considered the region to be cursed, warning settlers to avoid building there. During World War II, the government had indeed established a prisoner of war camp at the location, but it had been closed abruptly in 1944, after a series of incidents that the military records described only as containment failures. In the 1950s, the site had been used for atmospheric research, but that program had also been terminated early due to anomalous readings and safety concerns. The psychiatric facility Derek had mentioned had operated from 1971 to 1978, specializing in patients who exhibited what the medical records termed reality dissociation disorders. But the facility had been shut down after what news reports described as a tragic incident involving multiple casualties. Each iteration of the site's use had ended abruptly, often with official explanations that raised more questions than they answered. And now Marcus was part of the latest chapter in that troubled history. When he returned for his third night, Marcus felt like he was beginning to understand the true nature of his job. He wasn't just a security guard. He was a sentinel, standing watch over something that defied easy categorization or control. Derek met him at the gate as usual, but this time he had additional instructions. "Dr. Chen wants to meet with you before you start your shift," Derek said. "She's waiting in her office." Dr. Chen's office was located in the administrative section of the facility, an area Marcus hadn't explored during his previous patrols. The office itself was surprisingly normal. A standard corporate setup with a desk, chairs, filing cabinets, and diplomas on the wall. Dr. Chen herself was a woman in her 40s, with graying hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to see more than they revealed. "Please, sit down, Marcus," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. "I want to discuss your experiences during your first 2 nights." Marcus took a seat, unsure what to expect from the conversation. "Your reports have been very detailed and accurate," Dr. Chen continued. "That's unusual for new personnel. Most people either see nothing at all, or they see so much that they can't process it rationally. You seem to be finding a middle ground that's quite valuable." "I'm not sure I understand what I'm seeing," Marcus admitted. "Derek mentioned that this is some kind of containment facility, but I don't understand what's being contained or how." Dr. Chen leaned back in her chair, apparently considering how much to reveal. "The Montrose Research Facility is part of a classified government program that studies what we call temporal and dimensional anomalies. To put it simply, this location exists at a point where the normal rules of reality are somewhat relaxed. Relaxed how? Past events sometimes bleed through into the present. Alternate versions of reality occasionally overlap with our own, and sometimes things that shouldn't exist find ways to manifest in our world." Dr. Chen paused, studying Marcus's reaction. "The rules you've been given aren't arbitrary. They're based on years of research into how to safely coexist with these anomalies." Marcus tried to process this information. "So the things I've been seeing, the ghostly researchers, the party in the cafeteria, the thing in the elevator, they're all real. They're all real within the context of this facility," Dr. Chen confirmed. "But their reality is contingent on certain conditions being maintained. That's where you come in. Your job is to observe these manifestations, document their behavior, and ensure that the protocols we've established continue to keep them contained within these walls. What happens if the protocols fail?" Dr. Chen's expression grew serious. "Then the anomalies spread. The temporal bleeds and dimensional overlaps that we contain here begin to affect the outside world. And trust me when I say that the outside world is not prepared to deal with that kind of reality shift." She stood up and moved to a filing cabinet, from which she withdrew a thick folder. I'm going to show you something that might help you understand the importance of what you're doing here." The folder contained photographs, documents, and reports dating back to the 1940s. Dr. Chen spread some of the materials across her desk, revealing images that made Marcus's stomach turn. "These are from 1944. During the final weeks of the prisoner of war camp," she explained, "the commanding officer decided that the reports of supernatural activity were just prisoners' psychological warfare, and he ordered his men to ignore the containment protocols that had been established." The photographs showed the aftermath of what appeared to be a massacre. Bodies were scattered throughout the camp, but they were wrong somehow, twisted into impossible positions, aged decades in minutes, or simply incomplete, as if parts of them had been erased from reality. 17 soldiers and 43 prisoners died in what the official reports called a containment failure, Dr. Chen continued. The survivors spoke of seeing their comrades attacked by things that looked like people they recognized, family members, friends, even versions of themselves from other times and places. She showed Marcus another set of photos, these from the psychiatric facility. In 1978, a night orderly at the psychiatric facility decided to help a patient by ignoring the specific protocols established for her care. The patient, a woman who claimed she could see all the possible versions of now, had been contained successfully for 3 years. But when the orderly removed her restraints and allowed her to leave her room, the photos showed a section of the facility that looked like it had been hit by a bomb, but the damage patterns were unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. Walls were aged to the point of collapse in some areas, while remaining pristine in others. The floor showed scorch marks that formed patterns resembling mathematical equations. 12 people died that night, Dr. Chen said quietly. The patient herself simply ceased to exist. Not died, ceased, if she had never been born. But the reality distortions she caused during her final hours took weeks to stabilize. Marcus stared at the photographs, beginning to understand the true weight of his responsibilities. "How many people know about this place?" "Very few," Dr. Chen replied. "A handful of government officials, the research staff, and the security personnel. Everyone who works here signs agreements that would result in life imprisonment if violated. The knowledge of what we do here is considered a matter of national security." She gathered up the photographs and documents, returning them to the folder. "I'm telling you this because you've shown that you can handle the truth. Most security guards either quit after a few nights or convince themselves that they're hallucinating, but you're documenting everything, following protocols, and maintaining your sanity. That makes you valuable to us. What exactly do you want from me?" "Continue doing what you're doing," Dr. Chen said. "Observe, document, follow the rules, but I also want you to be aware that your role may expand over time. We occasionally need personnel who can interface with the anomalies more directly, people who can maintain their grip on reality while dealing with things that exist outside normal reality." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "Interface how?" "That's a conversation for another time," Dr. Chen replied. "For now, focus on your current duties, but know that your performance is being evaluated for potential advancement within our program." As Marcus left Dr. Chen's office and prepared to begin his third night shift, he found himself questioning whether he really wanted to advance within a program that dealt with reality-defying anomalies on a daily basis. But he also couldn't deny a growing curiosity about the true nature of what was happening at the Montrose Research Facility. His third night began quietly, with normal patrols and camera monitoring. But as 2 a.m. approached, Marcus noticed something different about the Section C feeds. Instead of the ghostly researchers he'd seen the previous night, the cameras now showed what appeared to be a perfect recreation of the facility as it must have looked decades earlier. The laboratories were filled with equipment from what appeared to be the 1950s, and researchers in period-appropriate clothing moved through the spaces with purpose and urgency. But these weren't the translucent figures he'd observed before. These people appeared completely solid, completely real, as if Marcus was somehow looking back through time to witness events that had actually occurred in those rooms decades ago. As he watched through his peripheral vision, Marcus saw one of the researchers, a young man with thick glasses and a worried expression, approach a large machine that dominated the center of one laboratory. The machine was unlike anything Marcus had seen in the modern version of the facility, consisting of massive copper coils, banks of primitive computers, and what appeared to be a containment chamber made of thick glass. The researcher began operating the machine, and immediately the camera feeds began to distort. Static lines ran across the images, the lighting fluctuated wildly, and Marcus could hear a low humming sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Then, something went wrong. The containment chamber in the 1950s laboratory began to crack, and a bright light poured out of the fissures. The researchers in the scene began to panic, running toward exits that Marcus knew didn't exist in the current layout of the facility. Some of them appeared to age rapidly as they ran, their hair turning white and their faces wrinkling in seconds. Others simply faded away, becoming transparent and then disappearing entirely. The young researcher who had been operating the machine tried to shut it down, but his hands passed through the controls as if they were made of smoke. He looked directly into the camera with an expression of absolute terror, and Marcus realized that the man was aware of being observed across the decades. The researcher mouthed words that Marcus couldn't hear, but somehow understood. "Don't let it happen again." Then the feeds cut to static, leaving Marcus staring at screens filled with electronic snow that seemed to swirl and shift with deliberate malice. Marcus reached for his log to document what he'd witnessed, but found that his hands were shaking too badly to write legibly. Whatever he'd just seen had been more than just a glimpse into the past. It had been a warning. Before he could fully process the implications of what he'd witnessed, his radio crackled to life. It was Maria, and her voice was tight with fear. "Security! I need help. I'm in Section A, and something's wrong with the cleaning equipment. The floor buffers are running by themselves, and they're putting patterns into the floor that look like symbols." Marcus grabbed his radio and headed toward Section A, grateful for a concrete problem he could address. But as he made his way through the corridors, he noticed that the temperature was dropping again, and that same mechanical grinding sound was coming from within the walls. When he reached Section A, he found Maria standing in the main hallway, staring at the floor with a mixture of fascination and horror. The floor buffers were indeed running by themselves, moving in precise patterns that created symbols Marcus didn't recognize, but that somehow made him deeply uncomfortable to look at. "How long has this been happening?" Marcus asked. "About 10 minutes, Maria replied. "I came in to clean this section, and the machines just started up on their own. But look at what they're making." Marcus looked more closely at the symbols being polished into the floor and realized that they matched patterns he'd seen in Dr. Chen's photographs from the 1978 psychiatric facility incident. The same mathematical equations, the same geometric shapes that had been burned into the floor during that catastrophic containment failure. "We need to get out of here," Marcus said, taking Maria by the arm. "Right now." But as they turned to leave, they found their path blocked by a figure in a hospital gown. It was a young woman with long, dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold depths that went far beyond what should have been possible for a human being to contain. "You can see me," the woman said, and her voice carried harmonics that made Marcus's teeth ache. "That's interesting. Most people can't see me when I'm like this." Marcus remembered Dr. Chen's story about the psychiatric patient who had caused the 1978 incident. A woman who claimed she could see all the possible versions of now. This had to be her, somehow manifesting decades after her death. "You're not supposed to be here," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. "You need to return to wherever you came from." The woman smiled, and Marcus saw that her teeth were made of what appeared to be crystallized time, transparent structures that reflected not light, but moments and possibilities. "I never left," she said. "I've been here all along, watching, waiting for someone who could see clearly enough to help me finish what I started." The floor buffers continued their work behind them, and Marcus realized that the symbols they were creating were growing more complex, more detailed. Whatever the woman had been trying to accomplish in 1978, she was attempting to complete it now. "Maria, get to the security office and use the red phone," Marcus said without taking his eyes off the woman. "Tell Dr. Chen we have a Code 7 situation in Section A." Maria didn't need to be told twice. She ran toward the exit, leaving Marcus alone with the impossible woman and her self-operating machinery. "You understand what's happening here," the woman said, moving closer to Marcus with steps that left frost on the floor. "You can see through the veils that separate the possible from the actual. That's a rare gift." "It's not a gift I asked for," Marcus replied, backing toward the exit. "None of us asked for our gifts," the woman said, "but we have a responsibility to use them. I can show you things, Marcus. I can show you all the versions of reality that exist simultaneously, all the choices that branch out from every moment. Wouldn't you like to see what could have been? What might still be?" Despite his fear, Marcus found himself curious about what she was offering. The past few nights had shown him that reality was far more complex and flexible than he'd ever imagined. What would it be like to see all of it at once? But then he remembered the photographs in Dr. Chen's office, the twisted bodies and reality-scarred walls that had resulted from the last time someone had accepted this woman's offer. "I've seen enough," Marcus said firmly. "Whatever you're trying to do here needs to stop." The woman's expression changed from persuasive to disappointed to something much more dangerous. "You could have been part of something beautiful," she said. "Instead, you choose to be part of the system that keeps wonder locked away behind rules and protocols." The floor buffers suddenly changed their pattern, and Marcus realized that the symbols they were creating were now forming a perfect circle around him. As the last line was completed, he felt a strange sensation, as if the air around him had become thick and viscous. "Now you'll see whether your precious rules can save you," the woman said, and she began to change. Her hospital gown dissolved into mist, revealing skin that seemed to be made of the same crystallized time as her teeth. Her hair began to float as if she were underwater, and her eyes expanded to show not irises and pupils, but windows into swirling vortexes of possibility. Marcus felt reality beginning to shift around him. The walls of Section A began to show multiple versions of themselves simultaneously, new construction, aged decay, and states of existence that had no names. The floor beneath his feet showed the symbols the buffers had created, but also every pattern that had ever been made on that surface, from footprints to bloodstains to mathematical equations that described the architecture of impossibility. Through the chaos of overlapping realities, Marcus heard the sound of running footsteps. Dr. Chen burst into Section A, followed by two other people Marcus hadn't met before. One was carrying what appeared to be a weapon, but instead of a barrel, it had a complex array of mirrors and crystals. "Containment team, deploy pattern suppressors," Dr. Chen called out. "We have a full manifestation event." The person with the crystal weapon pointed it at the woman, and a beam of coherent light shot out, striking her center mass. Instead of causing physical damage, the beam seemed to slow her down, making her movements sluggish and deliberate. "Marcus, step outside the symbol circle," Dr. Chen instructed. "Move slowly, and don't look directly at any of the overlapping images you might see." Marcus carefully stepped over the polished lines on the floor and immediately felt the oppressive weight of altered reality lift from his shoulders. As he moved away from the circle, the multiple versions of Section A began to fade, leaving only the normal, contemporary version of the hallway. The containment team continued their work, using their crystalline weapons to create what appeared to be a cage of light around the woman. As the cage took shape, she began to fade, her crystallized skin becoming transparent and then invisible. "You can't contain possibility forever," she said as she disappeared. "Reality wants to be free, and eventually it will find a way." Then she was gone, leaving only the symbols polished into the floor and the memory of her impossible presence. Dr. Chen approached Marcus, her expression a mixture of concern and professional assessment. "Are you injured? Any disorientation, memory gaps, or perception anomalies?" Marcus took a mental inventory of his condition. He felt shaken, but otherwise normal. "I think I'm okay. But what was that thing?" "Patient 2327 from the 1978 psychiatric facility," Dr. Chen explained. Her real name was Sarah Kellerman, and she was admitted after claiming she could perceive multiple timelines simultaneously. During her containment breach, she became something else, something that exists partially outside normal time and space. But she died in 1978, didn't she? "Death is a more flexible concept than most people realize," Dr. Chen said, "especially for someone who exists across multiple temporal states simultaneously. We've been tracking her manifestations for decades, but this is the first time she's been strong enough to attempt a full reality revision." The containment team finished their work and began packing up their equipment. The crystalline weapons, Marcus noticed, were covered in warnings and handling instructions that were longer than most instruction manuals. "Marcus, I need to ask you something important," Dr. Chen said. "When Sarah offered to show you all the versions of reality, were you tempted to accept?" Marcus considered lying, but decided that honesty was more important than appearing strong. "Yes," he admitted. "For a moment, I was curious about what she was offering." Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the right answer. Curiosity is natural and healthy. It's people who claim they aren't tempted by these offers that we worry about. They're usually lying, which means they can't be trusted to resist when the temptation becomes stronger. Will she be back?" "Probably," Dr. Chen said, "but not for a while. Each manifestation requires enormous energy, and the containment protocols we just deployed will suppress her ability to gather that energy for several months at least." As the containment team finished their work and left Section A, Dr. Chen walked with Marcus back toward the security office. "Your performance tonight was exceptional," she said. "You recognized the threat, followed proper emergency protocols, and resisted a reality-altering entity without losing your grip on consensus reality. That's graduate-level anomaly management." "I was terrified the entire time," Marcus confessed. "Terror is appropriate when dealing with entities that can rewrite the fundamental laws of existence," Dr. Chen replied. "It's overconfidence that gets people killed, or worse, in this line of work." They reached the security office, where Marcus found Derek waiting with a concerned expression. "I heard there was a Code 7 event," Derek said. "Everyone okay?" "Fine," Dr. Chen assured him. Marcus handled his first major anomaly encounter very well. "I think he's ready for the advanced briefing materials." Derek looked surprised. "Already? Most guards need months of standard duty before they're ready for the advanced protocols. Most guards don't encounter Sarah Kellerman on their third night," Dr. Chen pointed out. "Marcus has been fast-tracked by circumstances, but he's proven he can handle it." She turned to Marcus. When you come in tomorrow night, report to my office first. I'm going to show you some additional materials that will help you understand the full scope of what we do here. You're no longer just a security guard, Marcus. You're now part of the containment team." As Dr. Chen left, Derek shook his head in amazement. 3 nights, he muttered. "It took me 6 months to see my first major anomaly, and another year before they trusted me with advanced protocols. You've got a real talent for this work." "I'm not sure talent is the right word," Marcus replied. "I feel like I'm stumbling through situations that could get me killed." "That's exactly what makes you good at it," Derek said. "The people who think they understand what's happening here are the ones who make fatal mistakes. The people who stay humble and follow protocols are the ones who survive long enough to actually help." The rest of Marcus's third shift passed quietly, with normal patrols and routine monitoring. But he found himself looking at the facility differently now. Every shadow could hide something impossible. Every sound could indicate a reality breach in progress. And every rule in his protocol manual had been written in someone else's blood. When Derek arrived for the morning shift change, Marcus was ready with his incident report, but he found himself struggling to find words for what he'd experienced. How do you document an encounter with someone who exists partially outside of time? How do you describe the sensation of standing in multiple versions of reality simultaneously? "Just write what you observed," Derek advised. "Don't try to explain it or understand it completely. The important thing is to create an accurate record that the research team can use to improve their containment protocols." As Marcus drove home after his third shift, he realized that his life had changed fundamentally over the past 72 hours. He'd accepted a job thinking he would be a simple security guard, but he'd become something else entirely, a guardian, standing watch over the boundaries between possible and impossible, between what is and what should never be allowed to become. The rational part of his mind still insisted that there had to be logical explanations for everything he'd experienced, but the evidence of his senses and the growing weight of responsibility he felt told a different story. He was part of something larger now, something that most of the world would never know existed, but that was essential for maintaining the stability of reality itself. When Marcus returned for his 4th night, he reported to Dr. Chen's office as instructed. She was waiting with another thick folder and what appeared to be a modified tablet computer. "Before we begin your advanced briefing," Dr. Chen said, "I need you to understand that the information I'm about to share with you is classified at the highest levels. The penalty for unauthorized disclosure isn't just imprisonment. It's complete erasure from all records, as if you never existed." Marcus nodded his understanding, though the threat sent a chill down his spine. The Montrose Research Facility is one of 17 sites worldwide that monitor and contain what we call consensus reality violations, Dr. Chen began. "These are locations where the normal laws of physics, time, and causality are weakened or broken entirely." She opened the folder and showed Marcus a world map marked with 17 red dots. Each site has its own specific characteristics and challenges. Some deal primarily with temporal anomalies, others with dimensional intrusions, and still others with entities that exist outside our normal understanding of life and death. "What makes this site special?" Marcus asked. "Montrose is what we call a convergence point," Dr. Chen explained. "Multiple types of anomalies occur here simultaneously, and they interact with each other in ways that create new and unprecedented challenges. It's also one of the most active sites. We record an average of 12 anomalous events per week." She handed Marcus the modified tablet. "This device will allow you to access our complete database of anomalous entities and events. Every strange thing that's been documented at this facility over the past 70 years is recorded here, along with the protocols that have been developed to deal with them." Marcus activated the tablet and began scrolling through the entries. The sheer volume of information was overwhelming. Hundreds of documented entities, thousands of recorded events, and detailed analyses of patterns that revealed the facility's history to be far stranger than even his recent experiences had suggested. Your new duties will include not just observation and documentation, but active intervention when necessary. Dr. Chen continued. You'll be equipped with specialized tools and trained in advanced containment techniques. But first, you need to understand exactly what you're up against. She pointed to a specific entry on the tablet. Start with Entity Classification 7 Alpha. That's Sarah Kellerman, the woman you encountered last night. Read her complete file, understand her capabilities and limitations, and learn the various protocols we've developed for dealing with her manifestations. Marcus opened the file and began reading. What he found was a detailed psychological profile of a woman who had been admitted to the psychiatric facility in 1971 after experiencing what doctors at the time had dismissed as severe dissociative episodes. But the more Marcus read, the more he realized that Sarah's delusions had actually been accurate perceptions of a reality far more complex than most people could comprehend. She wasn't insane, Marcus said after reading several pages of the file. No, she wasn't, Dr. Chen confirmed. She was perceiving multiple timeline branches simultaneously, which drove her to the edge of functional breakdown, but didn't make her delusional. The tragedy is that in 1971, we didn't have the knowledge or tools to help someone like her. The containment protocols of that era were crude and often counterproductive. What changed? Experience, Dr. Chen said grimly. Every major containment failure taught us something new about how to deal with anomalous phenomena. The 1944 POW camp incident taught us about temporal bleeding. The 1978 psychiatric facility breach taught us about reality revision capabilities.